Hello and a very warm welcome to Wednesday Wandering with me, Cate Field. Wandering about stuff, not just wandering off. This is the place to explore creativity, inspiration and the deeper rhythms of an artistic and creative life. At certain times of the year, the light begins to change. And here in the Northern Hemisphere, April light seems hopeful. It stretches across the garden in new ways, waking the ground, brushing the edges of our day with something quietly promising. But for those in the Southern Hemisphere, the light is leaning into gold, casting longer shadows and asking us to slow down. Light tells us what season we're in, out there and in here. And here in England, April light feels full of possibility. It stretches a little further each evening and it spills across the sea in unexpected ways. And every now and then, it warms your skin like a secret blanket. But those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, the light is shifting differently. Leaning inwards, softer, more golden. The kind of light that invites reflection. The kind that makes you want to wrap up in a shawl and sit quietly by the window. And I find it fascinating, the way we share this month in the Northern and in the Southern Hemispheres. So, how have artists responded to light? Artists have always responded to light. It's not just what they see, it's what they feel. Margaret Preston, a pioneering Australian modernist, painted native flora with such vibrancy. And her work often reflects the earthy tones and clear shadows of the southern sun. Her still lifes feel solid and sun-drenched, deeply rooted in place. Margaret Preston was born in 1875 and she died in 1963. She was a modernist painter, a printmaker, a champion of Australian identity in art. And she was one of the most influential Australian artists of the 20th century. She was a trailblazer, not only as a woman in what was then a very male-dominated art world, but as someone who sought to define a uniquely Australian modernism, rooted in the land and in the native flora and in the First Nations cultures. Her work is instantly recognisable, vibrant, graphic and rhythmic. Bold still lifes of native flowers, strong forms, confident colour. Her woodcuts in particular have a kind of visual authority, I think. Simultaneously elegant, but still really robust. Margaret Preston's early training was in traditional painting, but she was soon drawn to more modern ideas, modernistic ideas, particularly after she studied in Munich and Paris. She was really influenced by Japanese woodblock prints, post-impressionism and cubism, and she brought these techniques and ideas home with her. But what makes her so compelling, especially for a discussion on light and seasonal energy, is her focus on the Australian native flora. Banksias, waratahs, gum blossoms, I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly, often arranged with almost sculptural quality in her still lifes. She felt that European flowers like tulips or roses had no place in Australian art. Atmospheric light, oh my goodness, her prints often used blocks of warm shadow and light, reflecting the dry clarity of the Australian sunlight where she lived. And she had this deep, deep connection to place. She believed that Australian art needed to reflect the land and the culture of Australia itself, rather than borrow from European traditions. She felt really, really passionate about this. She was fascinated by Aboriginal art. She was one of the first white Australian artists to publicly advocate for Aboriginal art as central to national identity. And while her understanding was shaped by her time and carries its own limitations, she did show deep and significant respect and interest in the work of Aboriginal artists, both past and present. She was extremely opinionated and outspoken, and I love her for that. Her writing is, I think, as compelling as her art. She once said, "I have tried to establish an art suited to our requirements and one that is readily understood by the Australian public." And on Light and Nature, she wrote, "I want to make Australian art as bright as the landscape it comes from." There's an assertive clarity to her vision. She wasn't trying to paint an idealised England, for example, transplanted to the Southern Hemisphere. She wanted art that grew out of the soil that it stood on. She was so ahead of her time in so many ways. Her celebration of local materials, her passion for the environment, her acknowledgement of the Indigenous art, as I mentioned earlier, and her push for women artists to be taken seriously. Her influence can be seen in many Australian artists who followed, particularly women, and particularly women working with themes of domestic space, natural form, and cultural identity. Today, she is remembered not only as a master printmaker and painter, but for a fierce advocate for artistic originality and national self-awareness. What a woman. Next, I want to talk to you about Joan Eardley, painting in the wild weather of coastal Scotland. Joan Eardley's seascapes are filled with the kind of light that comes after the rain. Grey skies broken open, waves catching a sudden brilliance. She wasn't painting picturesque scenes, she was capturing atmosphere. Her work has energy and mood. Now, she was born in 1921 and also died in 1963. Scottish painter, poet, fascinated by the sky and the sea and the streets. But she was born in Sussex in southern England in 1921, and she then moved to Glasgow as a teenager, but she remained deeply connected to Scotland for the rest of her life. She trained at the Glasgow School of Art and then later in Italy, but it was her return to the slums of Glasgow and then to the coastal village of Cate in northeast Scotland that truly defined her as an artist. Her work focuses on two very different worlds. We have the raw, noisy life of working class children in Glasgow, especially the Sampson family. If you want to kind of explore more of her work, look at that. But then she has the wild, changeable landscapes and fields of Cate where she eventually lived in a cottage with no electricity or running water. She really was quite extraordinary. Both these genres she painted with huge amount of honesty and urgency, capturing fleeting moments of life, whether a gust of wind across a wheat field or the grubby the grubby face of a child playing on the pavement, Eardley's work often feels weathered by the very elements she painted. She used thick impasto, bold charcoal lines, wild brushstrokes and brushwork, particularly in her later landscapes. And in her seascapes, light is never still. It's always breaking, rushing and moving. And yet her paintings are never chaotic for the sake of it. There's a structure beneath the storm. She once said, "I like the wild sea and the lonely places I have come to paint. I love the light that comes from the sky." In her Catiline paintings, the light is everything. It's not delicate. It's elemental, harsh at times, filled with weather and presence, the kind of light you feel in your bones and in your heart. And in the 1950s, Joan Eardley began painting children from the slum tenements around her Glasgow studio. They were cheeky, noisy, tough, often unwashed, but she didn't sentimentalise them. She painted them with deep empathy, with respect and almost a maternal protectiveness. These paintings are loud with texture and spirit. She captured those smudged faces, the oversized coats, the little hands shoved into pockets. The children seem aware of being watched, but entirely unselfconsciously. These works now form an essential part of Scottish art history, preserving a moment and a community that was soon to disappear. She died tragically young at just 42 from breast cancer. And yet in her short life, she produced an astonishing body of work, much of it filled with the kind of light and life that artists twice her age might have struggled to convey. Today, she is revered in Scotland and beyond, and quite rightly so. The Scottish National Gallery holds a major collection of her work, and her popularity has only grown in recent years. Exhibitions like, I saw an exhibition of hers a few years ago, and it really helped people discover her profound windswept vision. Eardley's light is never staged. It's real, arriving suddenly through the clouds, glancing off seawater, filtering through the tenement window. And she reminds us that light can be fierce, wild, but also holy. Her painting practice was frequently outside, outdoors in freezing winds, her canvases tied to fences so they wouldn't blow away. This embodies a kind of creative tenacity that still inspires. It really inspires me. She painted with the weather, not despite it. And many people like me, and probably you too, feel an instant connection to her work. There's a kind of emotional truth in her paintings. Whether you're looking at a wide, windswept field or a child grinning through those kind of cracked glass or the railings, Joan Eardley's art reminds us that beauty doesn't need to be polished. It can be muddy and wind-blown and fiercely alive. Both these women, Margaret Preston and Joan Eardley, understood something vital, that light is never just physical. It shapes how we experience the world and how we create. In my own studio, I often find that light shifts the entire mood of what I'm making. There was a day last spring, a year ago, I remember it clearly because I was working on a painting with really, really soft tones and everything was quiet and muted and neutral. And then a beam of light kind of came in. I had my door open and the light came through, bounced off something shiny on my desk, and it lit up the paper that I had almost discarded. I'd been doing some sketches and suddenly it was the centre of everything. It kind of changed my whole piece on what I was working on at that moment. And the same thing happens in dance. There are moments in a dance class. Sorry, I have deviated a little bit into dance. I work with older dancers, more mature dancers, and there's this moment when a light kind of shifts its way across the floor and the energy changes and we move differently when the light changes. It's like the body remembers something soft and joyful. So wherever you are, whether the light is rising into spring or falling into the golden hush of autumn, I hope you take a moment to notice how it moves throughout your day. Margaret Preston painted with clarity and boldness, inspired by the strong Australian light and the forms of native flowers. Her work reminds us to be rooted in place, to see with intention and to create from the world as it truly is and not as we're told it should be. Joan Eardley, by contrast, painted with weather in her hair, the wind in her paint. She stood in the storms. She tied her canvases to gates and fences and she let the light shape her work as fiercely as the sea itself. Her paintings hold a kind of truth that isn't tidy, but it's so alive. These two women, different in temperament and geography, shared one essential quality. They responded to the light they were given. And so I leave you this week with a simple question. What is the light asking of you today? Maybe it's asking you to soften, to begin, to reflect, to rest. Describe it, sketch it, follow it across the room and into your journals or your canvas or your sketchbook. Let it guide your creative attention and your intention, however it shows up. And as always, keep wandering, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.